Okay, your copper foil on your pieces is done, and now it's ready to be soldered. So I've got the copper foil on the edges that are touching. Now, if I plan on putting copper foil around the outside, I'll do that afterwards, after I get these soldered on. That way I can straighten off the sides and make it perfect, okay? So you're gonna need quite a few different pieces of material to work with here. Let me show you some of the things you're gonna need. You're gonna need a soldering iron. This is a soldering iron right here, and this is the holder. This is plugged in, and it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to heat up. This is extremely hot. Do not touch the end or you will burn yourself, okay? You're gonna need a little wet sponge, and you get this sponge wet and you put it right there. You're gonna need something called flux. This is called liquid flux here, safety flux. There's not much left in here. When you apply the flux, you're not gonna use this jar. You're gonna open this jar and you're gonna put a little bit into a paper cup that I have in a holder. And the reason I have the holder is so that I don't accidentally knock it over. You don't need very much. It's a very tiny amount. Put the cap back on, put this off to the side. You're gonna need solder, okay? Solder is actually spelled, looks like solder. It's called 50-50 solder. That's what you're gonna use. It looks like wire, it's not. It's a metal that melts at a really low temperature. This is a combination of, let's see here. I forgot what it is, tin and lead. So this is called the solder. I'm gonna hold this, I'm gonna use my solder like this, okay? Now, what I'm gonna do first, I'm gonna do what's called spot soldering. And on my piece here, I don't want this is gonna move around. If I try soldering, now hold on, this soldering iron hasn't been turned on. If I try soldering this, I might end up bumping it and moving it, okay? So what I wanna do is I wanna make sure these don't move. So I got a real easy and simple way to do that. All you're gonna do is take this thin masking tape that I have, and just gonna get a couple pieces, and you're gonna straddle. Don't put the tape down real heavy, it's just to hold it in place. Hold your two pieces, put a piece of tape across there, holding those two pieces, okay? We'll put another one right here, holding those two pieces, and then get these nice and tight, and put these right here, okay? So that's how you're gonna do this. You're gonna just temporarily hold these together, and then we're gonna do what's called spot soldering. So when we did this one, whoever student did this one, he had all the pieces laying out. He had little pieces of tape all over the place holding all these pieces together. And then when he does spot soldering, what he's gonna do is hit every intersection. So that would be like all these spots where there's intersections there. So on my new one here, I'm gonna solder it at the intersection right here. Then I'm gonna go right there. And then I'm gonna take the tape off and I'm gonna show you how to solder the seams, okay? So if you see really big projects like this one, okay, this was all laid out on a big board and there was tape holding all these pieces together, and then they were soldered in these little joints. Now this is the back of it. I never did go over it with solder. I want solder on the front. We're gonna solder ours on the front and the back. So you're gonna do the front, and then you're gonna flip it over and do the back. When you do the back, you don't need to spot solder because it'll already be together. So here we go. I'm gonna be ready to solder this right now. Now a couple things. When I take the solder, now right now I'm gonna use a soldering tool, and this one is not turned on, okay? This is cold. It's cold because if I touched it right now, I would burn myself really bad. This has not been plugged in so I can touch it, okay? This is how it's gonna work. My solder, I'm a right-handed guy, so I'm gonna turn this. Well, it doesn't matter right now. And I'm gonna just go, when I set the solder on here, the solder is gonna hit the top of this. I'm just gonna put this down and go like this, and it's gonna melt the solder and put a little piece of solder right there. Then I'm gonna go like that. So basically, I'm gonna turn it sideways. I'm gonna lay the flat part of this soldering tool on here, not the corner or the edge, okay? I know that's hard to see, so I've got some little aid. Let's pretend this is the tip of the soldering. I'm gonna lay this flat on there. I'm not gonna do like this on the corner, and the solder is gonna hit the top of it right like this, and I'm gonna drag it along, okay? So first, before we use solder, we have to put the flux down. What the flux is, that stuff that we put in a cup. The flux helps it to melt. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'll just move my cup over so maybe it's in the view of the camera here, maybe a little bit here. And I'm going to take I got just a watercolor brush, just put a little flux on there, and I'm gonna put some flux right here on this area, that area, that area, and that area. Okay? If I was doing a big project, I might just do a couple areas because the flux will dry pretty quick. It just looks like water. Now the flux will help your metal to stick. If you don't use flux, it won't work. Okay? Then just put your brush off to the side. You don't need it for right now. Okay? Now I'm ready to solder it. So before you solder though, take your soldering iron and I'm going to brush it on this sponge. That cleans the tip off a little bit. I just kind of go like that and clean that off, okay? Then I'm gonna take my soldering iron and I'm gonna just spot solder this. I'm gonna zoom in pretty close here. And I'm gonna take I'm right-handed, so I'm holding this with my right hand. And my left hand, I'm gonna feed the solder on here. So all I'm gonna do is this. I'm just gonna put this here and just touch a little bit of solder and it'll melt. And see that tiny little bit of silver? And then a little bit there, like that, little there, like that, and a little there. I'm just barely touching it. Where kids make the mistake sometimes is they go gangbusters. They put big globs of solder on. You just need a little tiny spot to put those together. Now I'm gonna put my soldering iron back in my holder, okay, because I don't need it right now, and I'm going to take the tape off. I don't need the tape anymore. The tape, you don't put the tape on real secure because I don't want to peel up the copper foil. So my tape has been secured. Okay, that just put it together. You can see now nothing's coming apart anymore. So I did my spot soldering. Now, next, if you plan on putting foil around the outside, make sure you don't put a huge spot of solder right on the very edge. I came in from the edge. Notice that? I'm a little bit in from the edge. I'm not right at the very edge. I'm not right at the very edge. This one's maybe a little too close because I might be grinding this edge later and that solder will interfere with me grinding it. Now, since I like going from left to right, and you're gonna do the same thing, unless you're a lefty, you'll go from right to left. So just like reading a book. So all I'm gonna do is this. I'm gonna take my flux again, and I'm gonna flux this whole thing here and whole thing there. Lots of flux on there, okay? Now I'm gonna start my full soldering process. So what I'm gonna do here is this. I'll take my soldering iron, okay? Once again, I'm gonna clean it off on the sponge. Just clean it off like that, okay? Now I'm gonna take my solder, and I'm gonna lay my solder, right now if I touch that, it'll melt the solder that's already there. So I'm gonna feed my solder to the top here as I drag the soldering iron along. And when I get near the end, I'm gonna pull it up because there's enough solder to spread out. So don't keep packing solder on when you get to the end, or you have a big pile of it right there. Since I go to right to left, I'm just gonna turn this now. It's gonna be a lot easier if I go this way, rather than trying to drag it down in a weird direction. So go like this. And once again, I'm gonna feed the solder right here and drag it along like so, and then pull it up. There you go, it's soldered, okay? Now, if your solder looks really lumpy, sometimes it gets kind of lumpy, you can remelt it and just move this along it really slowly like this. It'll make a nice, smooth bead of solder. The key is slow, and I'll do the same thing this way. Really slow. It kind of melts it, it pulls it. And then pull it up, and I got a really nice seam right now that's been soldered. That's really all you got to do, okay? So once again, I'm gonna clean my tip off. I do that a lot, set it back in here. When you are done with your flux, this stuff costs money, pour the remainder of this flux back in to this jar right here, okay? And now, this is, it cooled, it's pretty warm, but I won't burn myself right now. I'm gonna flip this over. I'm gonna put flux on this side and do the exact same thing. Now, and I don't need a spot solder because all in place right now, okay? So that's what we're gonna be doing. Once again, if you end up doing a project, let's say like this bird, what you're gonna be doing is you're gonna put copper foil around every single piece, around every side. You're gonna then tape all the pieces together and then spot solder all the joints and then eventually solder all of these, and then we're gonna put solder all the way around the outside and solder a wire around the outside that holds all the pieces together. A project like this, we would add copper wire here and cover that with solder later to make those little legs if you were doing something like that, okay? So that's really about it. It's pretty simple. This is just your little sample. When you're done with this sample, you're gonna turn it in for a technique grade, Okay, if it's bad, I'm gonna have you do it again. Just put a piece of tape on there and put your name on here, okay? So whatever your name is, write that on, and you're gonna hand that in to me, and that's been completed. Now, after this, I'm gonna have another little soldering project for you, and then we're gonna design whatever we're making, you know, whether it's gonna be a rather small design, not a gigantic design, something like this or this, and you can gauge that on how well you think you are at cutting out shapes. But we're gonna get a little more practice at cutting out shapes. Obviously, this has a lot of curves on it, but all those pieces are doable, okay? And that's it.